Yo, what's up? In today's video we are going to deal with the camouflage scheme on this Invader build. We are also going to bake in some of the initial weathering, literally quite a lot of ground to cover. So let's get started. Alrighty then, she is ready for her new dress. So let's start with the primer. In this case, we are starting with Mr. Surfacer 1500 Gray. For this build, I'm going to borrow a technique from Duke's models. I'm not going to follow much steps religiously and I will do my own take on it. So here the base coat will be LP11 silver. Now that the silver is on, let's set up ourselves for some chipping that will occur later on. First I will start with some liquid mask and a sponge for those little ferocious stones and debris that bombard the leading edges and other surfaces to chip the paint away in a very distinctive fashion. Now using a few images of the real aircraft and a fine paintbrush, I will apply some masking fluid a little bit more deliberately so I can closer replicate what I can see on the pictures. I'm using water to clean the brush before the mask has any time to cure. It has some effect but not that much. This brush will not be that usable for painting after I am done with this. Now let's start adding some colors. And first I'm going to apply a base coat of Tamiya's LP35 Insignia White on the wingtips and on the top of the tail. Here I have fixed the rudder temporarily so I can paint them together with the rest of the tail and then I will remove it. Alright, so off camera I masked off the white bands that are between the red paint and the camouflage using a 1mm flexible tape. So now I'll try to spice things up a little bit using dark earth on the white so we can get a little bit more interesting looking red paint. Now for the red I'm going to use MRP's Insignia Red, which is FS1136, which I think will be a good color for these wingtips, and I will be applying it very lightly so we can gradually cover the mottling underneath it. And here you can clearly see why masking a wider area than what I masked is, I would say, necessary, because even though I tried, I still have quite a lot of overspray. But this is not that important right now, because we'll have another color on top. The painted wingtips look rather nicely, and even though it is not absolutely obvious that we have done any kind of work underneath them, there is still something going on there. Now let's have some fun painting the underneath of the aircraft. I'm going to start off with some navy blue here and there. We'll try to be random and we're going to do some stuff that will look a little bit crazy maybe, but it's an experiment, and since this is a undercoat we can always cover it up. First off, I'll start with some marbling to my best abilities. I am going to do the navy blue in a few different areas, making the panels a little bit different. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit of a warmer tone with this dark earth. Again, trying to do some paneling and additional features. I'm not exactly sure how this will work, but let's throw some RLM83 dark green into this patchwork and see what will happen. Now it is time to start cooking the first blending layer, which will be with the base color neutral gray, in this case Tamiya XF53. As usual, nice light layers, very transparent, so we can build up the opacity in a very controlled manner. And in this case I'm not going to go ahead and build the full opacity because we're going to add some more details here and there, so we'll have to have another blending coat later. And in order to prevent losing everything that we have done so far, I will make this blend coat a little bit more restrained. For the second coat of this first blending layer, I'm going to switch over to the 0.3mm airbrush because I really don't want to stay here another month. So again, the goal is the same, just with a little bit more oomph to work with. Alright, that looks not bad, but we still have quite a lot of interesting things to add, so let's move on. Now that we have the first blending layer complete, I will add some more structure and details in the paint, this time with some very highly diluted insignia white. Let's first add some streaks on the leading edges. Alright, and now for something that may look like corrosion control or other touch-ups or something that has been weared down. And now it is time to apply the final blending layer and hope for the best. Now I have applied some hairspray on the top surfaces here and around the nose and also on the nacelles, so we can now start to apply the top camo layer. But first let's apply the anti-glare area here, and for this I'm going to do some Tamiya LP65 rubber black. First with some mottling, and then I will blend it a little bit so we can have a really nice interesting piece, although it is in black only. I masked off this anti-glare panel, and to obtain a little bit more integrity in this patchwork of tape, I will apply some masking liquid using silicone brush. Hopefully this will prevent the tape from lifting and other issues that may occur, like paint bleeding through. As they say, better safe now than sorry later. And since the area around the nose and the engine gondolas or nacelles or whatever they are called are repainted at some point of this aircraft's life, I'm going to use darker colors for the marbling layer so we can have richer and saturated olive drop over these repainted areas. Also, I'm going to continue with the paneling approach and on the panels which are having a curvature transforming from a side to a top panel, I will do some slight fading towards the top so that it looks like the parts which are on the horizontal surfaces and receive more sunlight get faded quicker than the rest of the aircraft, especially underneath the wings and on the bottom of the nacelles. The first color that I'm going to employ is Mr. Hobby RLM70 Black Green. The next series of panels I will marble with red brown, which is again from Mr. Hobby. The next color is going to be navy blue, again on different panels. Now let's take the fading into account with some lighter shade of green, which in my case is dark green from Mr. Hobby. Alright, I think that we can call this technique the Middle Eastern rug shading. What you say? Now let's start blending all these colors together with some olive drop in its full strength. Now this paint job was done in field conditions allegedly, so I will assume that it is not perfect, and most likely the demarcation line between the neutral gray and the olive drop is not perfect. That's why I decided to do it freehand instead of masking it. And this is the exact amount of overspray that has been achieved on the airfield. Or rather, I ran out of talent right here, not being able to achieve any better, and this is it. But still not a bad attempt, I think. It's very difficult to get right here, but the other way was to assemble the nacelles after the painting, which was not going to happen. Now that I'm thinking of it, maybe I should have painted first the faded olive drop and this more saturated olive drop over it. But if it looks like I have made a mistake, I can always go back and put one more coat of the dark olive drop. The bottom half of the engine cowling will have a little bit more worn and faded paint, so I will paint with the fresh olive drop only the top part. The rudder will also be in a fresh coat of olive drop, so let's put that on. Now that I still have some olive drop left over in the cup of the airbrush, I will start applying another Middle Eastern rug shading, and this will be the darker color of the batch. I will put some on the wings, but mostly I will do whatever is in the shadows, so it is a little bit darker than the rest of the shading. This area here is exceptionally hard to manage for me, so let's see what I can do. Alright, the olive drop is out of the way. The next color in our intricate shading work will be dark earth. Maybe you noticed that the voiceover is different than usual. That's because I'm recording it while I'm doing the actual thing. With this I hope to achieve more unfiltered and genuine commentary, because oftentimes when I record the voiceover, after I record the footage, the voiceover lacks emotion and involvement. I hope this approach will bring you closer to the action, and I will try to become better at building models and speaking in the same time. It is surprisingly hard to keep your thoughts and speech flowing while doing something that requires some level of concentration. The next color to apply will be dark yellow, or otherwise known as Dunkelgelb. The next color that I will apply is medium gray, and I'm not really sure how much of an effect it will have on the overall look, especially given how little it is distinguishable from the silver base, but I guess we will have to see a little bit later on. I made myself a mix of XF57 buff and XF62 olive drop. To do the mix I used my calibrated eye, so I cannot really tell you what kind of a ratio there is, but in any case this is the first blending coat. I might change the mixture for the final blending coat to give it more of a green appearance. Now it's more on the buff side. But here the idea is to blend a little bit before I add some more textures and then give it a final blending coat. Now I'm going to add more details using some highly diluted XF57 buff straight and my 0.2mm airbrush. First I'm going to start with something that I can see on the leading edges of some reference photos that I have. It looks like to be some kind of a deformation of the skin, which I can somewhat replicate, making series of stripes on the leading edge along the airflow, and hopefully this will represent the effect I'm after good enough. Next up, I would like to have the ailerons a little bit paler than the rest of the wing, so a coat of buff for them, and I'm going to use some paper to shield the rest of the wing so I can have a nice sharp transition. And finally, for this color, let's do all the repair jobs, touch-ups, corrosion control, whatever it might be. That will add a little bit more into the overall look of the aircraft. Now it is the time for the final blending coat. Here on the top surfaces, those which are horizontal, I'm going to use the same color, only more diluted, so we can get this all important opacity control, because here it's always the question, is it enough, is it not enough? It is usually down to one coat to decide whether or not it's just ruined, nothing is visible, or it is overdone. So no pressure. I will assume that the paint is taking less beating from the sun on the sides of the aircraft. So to account for that, I will add a little bit of fresh olive drop into the base mixture so we can get a little bit olive droppier color. The effect that I'm after should not be right away visible, but rather perceivable, if this is an expression that I can use. But anyhow, I suppose that you get my point. And finally here under the wings, where it is even shadier, I added some more olive drop to the mixture, which will darken it even further, reflecting the shadiness of the area and hence the less faded paint. The same color I'm going to use to paint the lower portion of the engine cowling. And there we have it. The large flat surfaces are nicely broken down by the pre-shading, and we have a busy textured paint even at this early stage. I applied a few layers of pure olive drop on the overspray areas so that it looks like the fresh paint is on top, and it looks better that way in my opinion. In the next episode I am going to deal with the markings, of which a big portion are going to be painted on. The progress of this and other projects you can follow on my Patreon page with daily updates. This is it for today. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy modeling fellas!